Blind hijacking describes as a type of session hijacking in which the attacker cannot capture the return traffic from the host connection. This means that the attacker blindly injecting malicious or manipulative packets without seeing any confirmation of the desired effect through the packet capture. The attacker must attempt to predict a sequence number of TCP packets traversing for network between the victim and whatever is on the other end for the established connection. The reason for this prediction goes back to the TCP three-way handshake, which has the function of synchronizing sequence number between two parties in a process of establishing a connection. So we kind of look at a number of different attack vectors for TCP hijacking, and I want to start with blind hijacking now. What is in the take two trying here is to predict the sequence number and the target host sends so that they can create what appears to be a legitimate connection from the host. It's blind because they cannot discover the existing sequence numbers themselves. They have to predict them instead. Now this is all dependent on the attacker's ability to actually predict the second numbers, and it's blind and they cannot sniff the existing traffic, so they have to derive it by any other means. The attacker may specifically look at the risk host running version of the operating system known as produce predictable sequence number. So let's walk through the process. Here is a two host, and there is a communication between the backwards and the forwards with sequences and acknowledgement numbers. Now let's talk about the attacker in, and here the attacker who is looking for those hosts at risk of predictable sequence numbers. Now once identified, the attackers wants to desynchronize the connection between machine. Basically what that means is that the attacker is aiming to change the sequence or acknowledge the number of the server. Now they can do this in a few different ways, like for example they could send null data to the server, which means the CNAC number will increment on that end but not on the client side. And another and final approach would be the send a reset flag. In fact, you may have noticed in the early TCP header diagram that there is an RST attribute. Now if the attacker can send that to the server, they could destroy the sessions from that end. Now once the attacker has finally and successfully desynchronized the connection, they can then insert themselves back to the communication by taking advantage of that predictable and sequence number, and then again communicate that directly. The host and the service synchronize with the attacker so that they can resume the communication themselves. So blind hacking is one potential text vector, but again it's useful when the attacker cannot actually sniff the connection, but they can exploit the predictability of sequence numbers. So let's move on and have a look at the approach. And also one point, the attacker can use when they can actually sniff the connection, and also attacker can inject the malicious data or command into the intercepted communication in the TCP session, even if the source route is disabled. And also the attacker can send the data or command but has no access to the responses that he get. So remember that a packet within the window would be accepted in this blind TCP hijacking. So sending a valid packet with a RST flag would drop the connection. So this would cause the connection to drop straight away. So sending a valid packet on the other hand, sending a valid packet with a SON flag would reset the connection. This means that this would drop the connection after the host responded to the packet, not like the previous one where the connection dropped the straight away. Both of the above point that I mentioned can be very nasty as a DOS attacker. And for DOS attacks, sending a packet with a valid payload would get the host to execute a command. For example, inserting a command into a FTP connection. So all of this blind TCP hijacking because they are non-interactive exploits, but they are very effective and easy, and on the other side they are very difficult to trace. So finally the attacker, I can say that the attacker can inject the malicious data or comments into the intercepted communication in the TCP session even if the source routing is disabled. So the attacker can send the data and comments but has no access to see the responses.